Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Blazor e-commerce series. I know it has been a while. Well, maybe you've read it already in the community tab. We have moved, so yeah, that's kind of stressful. But now I'm back. I've got my own studio, I've got new equipment, and well, let's just see how this episode goes. In this episode, the big goal is to log in a user and authenticate this user and display stuff depending on the user's authentication state. You can see it already on the screen. There's some authorization stuff happening here in the console, and well, you won't see much, but under the hood it is kind of complex. We've got this new login button here, and we can use any user credentials we want. It is not doing some kind of JSON Web Token authentication yet, and we don't register this user, we don't store it in the database. It's just a simple form to, well, yeah, log in any user you want. Again, I hit return, and now you can see it says welcome back Patrick instead of welcome to Blazing Shop, and we've got this logout button. Anything else works as expected and as before, and now I can log out, and now we see welcome to Blazing Shop, and here you can see already that some authorization is happening here. It states authorization was successful, and after that, after I log out, it has failed. Well, and to do that, again, there's some stuff to do, but first, thank you very much again to all my supporters that bought me a coffee. Maybe you want to buy me a coffee too. It is quite early as always, so I really need some coffee to do this. And apart from that, of course, please like and subscribe this video, and maybe even click the bell icon to get a notification when a new episode is online. And I hope that it will be much faster now with all the equipment set up now. And I'm working on an online course that I want to make out of this series that is much more structured, has more content, and even, I guess, goes more into detail. And if you want to get early access to that, subscribe to my newsletter. Maybe, I promise I won't spam you. At max, I post or send an email once a week, so it's rather once a month, but still, maybe you want to check this one out. All right, I would say let's get to Visual Studio. You can get all the code you will see here on GitHub. Repositories in the video description. So yeah, if you haven't already, just download it, install it, make the entity framework migration with the SQL Server Express database, and then you're good to go. Alright, so now in Visual Studio, I've got all my projects open here, as you can see. And the very first thing, and I think that's the easiest part, is adding a new user model. So in the shared project, we go to add, and then we add a new class, and this is simply called user. Let's make this a public one, and then we add some properties. And again, this is not the final authentication. There is no real authentication going on the server and with the database, and that's why we add the following properties. First, the ID as an integer. Maybe we'll use that in a later episode, so the ID makes sense. And then, in essence, just for the form, we use username. That's okay. And then we also use the password as a string. And if you want to use this model here to register a user and store it in the database, you would change that. Usually in my other courses, you will see that I use byte arrays for that. Byte arrays for the password hash value. It will be hashed, the password, and a byte array for the password salt. But that's not the topic of this episode. So ID, username, and password is enough. I think we can even ditch the EID, but let's just keep it there. So username and password for the form we will build in a second, because now we need a page for this user model, and that would be the login page. So in the client project now, in the pages folder, we add a new Razor component, and we call this login, simple as that. And since this is a page, we will also use the page directive. You know this one already. And we access this one with the route login. Makes sense, right? Okay, and now the very first thing the very next thing we need is a form to enter our credentials. And for that, we will use the edit form component of Blazor, especially if you want to use any built-in components like the input text we will use in a second. You want to use an edit form, and not only that, when you want to use validation, you would also use the edit form, but this should not be part of this episode here. Maybe in one of the next ones, if you want to have a look at validation, write that down in the comments, please. Then I will make an episode with form validations. But anyways, we have an edit form, and this edit form needs a model, and this model can be seen down here, and this would be our user. So user, and this one is a new user, like that, and that's already the model we can use in the edit form, and you will see in a minute that the properties of that user will be then available in this form. And there's also another thing we want to add, and this would be a method we want to call onSubmit. So there's the option to use onSubmit, or we can also use onValidSubmit. Doesn't really matter in this case, so maybe just use submit, and we will add a method called handleLogin. Now down here in the code block, it's a private void handleLogin, and for this state now, this method would do nothing else than just logging something into the console, like log me in, right? So we can test this in a second. But first, now the form. First thing here is a div with the class provided by Bootstrap again, form group. Then we add a label for the user name, and this one is called username, of course. And then the input text, again, this is now a built-in component of Blazor WebAssembly. Then the ID is username here, and now we add this thing here, bind value, and this now will be the username of our user model. So this is this model here that then can be found in the code block. Okay. So that's for the whole form magic in essence. And let's add the form control class, again provided by Bootstrap, to make this a little bit prettier at least. Okay, and another div for the password. Again, it's a form group. And then we add a label for the password, call this thing password, and it's again an input text field with the ID password now, and bind a value. In this case, you know, it is the user password. The type I want to set to password so we don't see the text. And also the class is form control, and we close it like that. Okay, I think this is it for the default form, or the simple form, let's say. And to access this page, of course, we also need to change the nav menu and add a link to that page, and we can do this one down here below the for each. Let's add another drop down divider, because this is not a category, so maybe we can split this a little, and still we can copy this here. Yeah, let's copy this one and add it down here, and the href now is a login in this case, in this case, and the icon for that can be account login, and we call this link, or give it the name login. And now here I can already say that here will be an interesting part, because depending on the authorization or authentication state of the user, we will switch this. We will now see the login link, but later we want to see the logout link when the user has been logged in. So yeah, we'll see how we do that later. Okay, and now let's have a look. There's a big wall of errors from before, I hope. And let's see if the application has been rebuilt already. Yep, back to Chrome. We see this thing has been reloaded, and we see the beautiful login link now in the nav menu. And when we go there, we see the username and the password. And I totally forgot to add the button, of course. So let's fix that real quick. Back to Visual Studio and then to the login Razor page. Of course, down here we add a simple button. Type submit. The class would be button and button primary, and we simply call this login. Save that, and now back to Chrome. All right, there is our login button now. So let me just add a name and a password, hit return or click the login button. And as you can see here in the console, beautifully, it says log me in. And you can also see the green outlines here, which are part of the validation. And I have to admit, I'm not sure if this is now by default just green and they assume that validation is always used. Because if the validation says something is wrong, then you would see a red color here for the outline. But anyways, again, that's not part of this episode. We've got still a lot to do, but we got out of our form now. This is great. And now to explain the idea behind all this. So again, we are not storing this user anywhere. We cannot register this user. This is just there to have the option to log any kind of user in with any kind of credentials, and then depending on the login behavior, change an authentication state. And for that, usually you would make, with the login, you would make a call to the web service, and then the web service will check the password. And if the password is right and you would use JSON Web Token authentication, then you would return a token to the client and then store probably this token in the local storage, session storage, in a cookie, wherever. But for now, what I want to do is I just want to store the username in the local storage, change the authentication state so that the user is actually authenticated with its username, no matter what the username is and no matter what the password is. Store the username and then display the username on the homepage, because you've seen it maybe in the intro that instead of welcome to Blazing Shop, you would then see welcome back and then your username. So this is the whole idea. And to make this work, first we have to change the handle login method in our login Razor page. So in here we need the local storage, of course, and we did this already. We just inject the local storage service, call this local storage. We make this thing an asynchronous method, and then instead of console write line log me in, let's just keep it there and then add await local storage set item async, and this would be a string, and we simply call this username and then user name, like that. And then there's another thing I want to change, and for that we need the navigation manager, because after logging in I want to navigate the user to the home page so we see the result in the end then. And for that, again, the navigation manager has to be injected. We add the navigation manager here, and down here now we say navigation manager navigate to, and then just the home page, like that. All right, I would say let's test this again. So we are here on the home page, and let's open the application tab here and then local storage, and maybe there's just the card. Okay, so we go to login. Let's add another name now, Frodo, for instance. Add a password, and you can see username Frodo is stored in the local storage now. Isn't that nice? Okay, and let's delete it again. So this works. Great. All right, and now we are going to the authentication. And the very first thing to use authentication is we have to install another package. So in Visual Studio, in the client project, first we have to stop the application, and then we right click the client project, then choose manage NuGet packages. And then we want to install Microsoft. It's already there because I did it before, of course. The package is called microsoft.aspnetcore.components.authorization. There's also a package Microsoft ASP.NET Core authorization. That's the wrong one. We need this one here, Microsoft ASP.NET Core components and then authorization. So click it, install it. Latest stable version is great. And then maybe we have to rebuild the whole application because Visual Studio is not knowing what's going on here. But anyways, we can see this now here in the project file. This has been added. Great. Okay, and after that, because we're lazy programmers, or at least I am, we can add the using directive to the imports file. So Microsoft ASP.NET Core components authorization. And with that out of the way, we can now create a so-called custom authentication state provider. And this authentication state provider will be used by our application to get the current authentication state of the user. But I would say ditch the theory, just implement this stuff now. In the client project, we add a new class. And we call this class custom auth state provider, for instance. You could choose any name you want, but custom auth state provider makes sense because it derives from authentication state provider, like that. And now you can see we need Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components authorization for that. And maybe this gives us some information. It provides information about the authentication state of the current user. Quite simple, right? And then there's already an error here. We have to implement a method, and that would be the method get authentication state async. And this is again an asynchronous method. Now in this method, or we can use this method wherever we want in our application to get the current authentication state, and depending on that authentication state, we can display different things. We can choose another behavior, but we can also use special components that use the authentication state provider with the current state out of the box. And this will be very exciting. But first, let's implement this method here. Now, the idea is that, again, we will have a look at the local storage and decide, depending on the username. So if there is a username stored in the local storage, we would say, okay, the user is authenticated. I know that's really simple and maybe also a bit stupid in a real world application, of course, so never do it like that. But anyways, this is just to show you and to learn, right? And this episode would blow up a lot if we would use a JSON web token authentication here and hash the passwords and so on. That's just too much. So maybe just do it that way. Thought a lot about that if I should really make this public. But anyways, please hit the like button if you like this episode and you think this is a good idea. Okay, anyways, again, local storage, we check if the username is stored in the local storage. If so, the user is authenticated. If not, it is not. And that's why we need a constructor, because we need the local storage, or have to inject the local storage service. So CTOR and then a tab for the constructor, and then API, a local storage service. We call this thing local storage. And of course, we need a using directive here, Blazor local storage. And we create and assign the field local storage and add the underscore as usual, like that. And then depending or concerning regarding the get authentication state async method, what this thing wants to return is an authentication state, right? And this authentication state needs a so-called claims principal, and the claims principal again may want a claims identity. So we really have to use claims here, as you might get by now. So let's just write the code and then I will say something about that. The very first thing is new authentication state. So this is the thing this method will return, and this one wants a claims principal, which is in essence the current user with its name, IDs, roles, whatever. And if we just add an empty claims principal, this is the same. I don't want to use it like that. An empty claims principal is in essence the same as an unauthenticated user because it has no name, it has no ID, and nothing. So if we would return this state here, then the application would know, okay, the current user is not authenticated. All right. Okay, and now we check if we get a username in the local storage. So first the username, and with await local storage, and then get item a string async, and then username. We want to check for the username, and if this thing now is not null or empty, username, that's the correct one, then we create a new identity. Okay, so this identity now is of type new claims identity, and this thing gets some claims in essence, and this would be a new array, and we only add one claim here in this particular case, and this would be of the type claim types name. As you can see here, there are already some attributes suggested, like the name, identifier, email, the role, and so on. But more on claims, I would say also in another episode. That again, this would be simply too much, and I think this is already a bit confusing and a bit complex. So I hope you're still with me. If so, thank you very much for all your support. Really means a lot to me that you're watching this episode for so long and following this series. That's just great. Okay, what did I do now here? I added one claim to this claims identity, and this is just the name, and this is the username the user used to log in. And also we gave this thing a name like test authentication type. And later when we use JSON Web Tokens, we would call this token authentication or something like that. And after that, we've got our identity, which is not empty. That's really important. And now we say that our state is a new authentication state with a new claims principal. And this claims principal is now not empty. It gets the current identity here with the username. So this happens in the case we find the username in the local storage, and after that we call an event, notify authentication state changed. Very important, because with that all the components using this get authentication state async method or using the authentication state provider know, something has been changed. Maybe the user is now authenticated or is not. So maybe we should re-render ourselves, something like that. And with this event, we also provide the state, and also here we return this state. Okay, I hope this was clear. A little, at least. We need this thing to expose the authentication state. And to make this also work, we have to go to the program CS, add some services and register this authentication state provider service. Of course. Okay, so to the program CS, and in here now we first have to add options, and then we also have to add authorization, and then we also register our authentication state provider. So whenever we want to inject an authentication state provider, we want to use our custom auth state provider here. And to be able to use this class, again, we need the using directive for Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Authorization. Okay. By the way, please tell me how the sound quality of this video is, because I got a new microphone because of the whole new situation of our new apartment. I got my own studio now, but the room is not treated well yet. But I think I will get there soon. Get some more stuff to reduce the echo and the background noise and so on. Okay, so we've got our authentication state provider. We registered this thing in the program CS. Now we have to go back to the login. And after logging in, we want to get the current state, right? So what we can do now is await auth state provider. And then, of course, we have to inject this thing first. Then maybe Visual Studio would know what I want here. So let's do that first. Maybe inject authentication state provider. Call this auth state provider. Now in this case, our custom auth state provider would be used. And now here with await auth state provider get authentication state async, we would get the current authentication state. We call this method actually. So by calling this method, the event, this one here, the notify authentication state changed event would be raised, and then all the components that will use this thing, and you will see them in a minute, will then know, okay, the authentication state has been changed. And that's why we have to call this method here. But anyways, to be able to expose this state now, we have to change the app eraser file. We have our router here, we have our route view here, but we also have to add a cascading parameter now in the app eraser file. And to do that, we first add this little thing here, cascading authentication state. Close this bracket down here. And also instead of the route view, the default route view, we now use the authorize route view like that. And with that, we expose now the current authentication state. And for our first test, I would say we use the nav menu, what I told you earlier. Here, the nav menu. We are here using the default nav link for the login button or the login link, whatever. But what we can do now is we can use the so-called authorize view component. And in this case, this thing would use the current authorization or authentication state of the user like that. And further, we can decide what to display in the case the user is authorized or is not authorized. And we want to display the login button now when the user is not authorized, of course. So not authorized, another component would be used to display the login link. And then we've got something like authorized to add a link where the user is then able to log out. We will not use a nav link here for that because there is no actual route there. We will just use a default link and change the style and then add another method for that. So let's do that real quick. We've got our nav link. We can already add a method here, call it logout, which will simply remove the username from the local storage. And let's also change the style here to a pointer so it really looks like a button. And then we say span with the logout icon. Why not? I should have just copy and pasted this. But anyways, this works as well. And log out, and then down here we add the logout method now. So this would be a private void logout, and do we have the local storage here already? I think not. Okay, let's just add it real quick. So I think we use the synchronous one, local storage. And down here, a local storage, remove item, username. All right, let's try this now. We have to restart our application. So that would be .NET watch run. Welcome to Blazing Shop. We go to login, Sam, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe. And we've got our log out button now. That's great. And we can log out and nothing is happening. Of course, because maybe you know this now, we have to call the get authentication state async method. Let's have a quick look in the console. Here it says that the authorization was successful, and just a quick look in application and then here the local storage. When we go back to the login page, username, yeah, why not, maybe, and then hit login, we see a username, we click log out, the username disappears, but we still have this thing here. So let's go back to Visual Studio and fix that real quick. So we have to also inject the authentication state provider. Authentication state provider, auth state provider, like that, I hope. And now auth state provider get authentication async, and this is an asynchronous method which is now called synchronously. You know what, maybe we can change that and make this asynchronous. So async await, remove item async, and also this thing here, await get authentication state, and we call the logout method here. This should be it. Let's check this out. Okay, app is loading. We go to login. Now we let Raistlin log in. If you know this character, let me know in the comments below. Log in. We've got our username here. We've got our logout button. We click logout, and now this is changed to login again, and the username disappeared. Great. And now there's only one little thing left actually. And this is the thing I told you in the beginning. Here on the home page, I want to see my name when I log in. And then we are actually done. And maybe you now already know how to do this by yourself. Let's go back to Visual Studio. And now in the index razor, here is already the difference between the category state and the state we don't are in a specific category. So let's change only the else state here, or the else case. We display welcome to Blazing Shop if the user is not authorized. And apart from that, we can then display welcome back username when the user is authenticated. And the very first thing we need here is the local storage again to get the actual username. And I think here now we are using the synchronous one because I want to use this inline in the code here. So I sync local storage service, local storage, and here we are adding another authorized view. Use the not authorized component and also the authorized component, and actually the product list can stay there. We just change the header. So if the user is not authorized, we choose welcome to Blazing Shop, and otherwise we say welcome back, and here we choose local storage, get item as string, and then username. This should be it. Let's test that now. All right, there's our app. Let's log in now. I am Darth Vader in this case. I'm logging in and I see welcome back, Darth Vader. Isn't that great? So this works, and this episode isn't that long, or was not that long, or as long as I expected it to be. But still, I think we did a lot, and maybe it was a bit too fast. If so, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. But apart from that, I will check this in, so the code will be available. GitHub repository is in the description below, as always. Thank you very much to all my supporters again. Maybe you want to buy me a coffee too sometime. It really helps to stay awake and continue this series. And also, please like, subscribe, and even click the bell icon to get a notification. It does make a difference and helps the YouTube algorithm to show everyone this video here. And don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter if you want to get early access to the upcoming Blazor e-commerce course. And if you already want to dive a bit deeper into Blazor WebAssembly, maybe you want to check out my Blazor WebAssembly full stack bootcamp. There's a 2-hour preview available here on YouTube. Just check out the link below or check out the info card. Thank you so much for staying with me, for supporting me, for watching this complete video. And I would say I see you next time. Take care.